Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. It's Brandon with Campbell Fitness, and today's video is a much requested video on refeeds. So what are they? The basics behind them? Should they be in your diet? And if so, how often? Now I will say this is going to be a very broad and introductory approach to refeeds, only because when we start talking about the specifics behind them, it really comes into play individual factors for the person, including body fat percentage, diet, and longevity of that diet. So in order to make this video appeal to the biggest audience possible, we're going to take a brief overview of the subject. So for this, let's talk first of all about what refeeds are. By definition, it means to feed again. In this case, we're talking about after periods of either starvation or malnourishment. So oftentimes when we're trying to lose weight, we go on caloric deficits for long periods of time. Now doing this has an effect on something known as our leptin levels. So leptin is something I've mentioned in the past, and it is something I will talk about more in depth in the future. But again, for general comprehension, I want to keep this very simplified. So what leptin is, it's a hormone within your body that's in charge of your metabolic rate. Typically, people with low body fat percentages will have low leptin levels. And what this means is you'll also have a very slow metabolism, or your metabolic rate is slower. As opposed to people with high levels of body fat percentage, they have a higher leptin level or a higher metabolic rate because they're eating more food. So what can happen is when you go on a caloric deficit for a long period of time and you have very low levels of leptin, your metabolism slows down. And I think most of us have experienced this firsthand, where we've been on a caloric deficit, but our weight loss is either plateaued or completely stopped. Sometimes we increase our energy expenditure, other times we cut calories further, but to no real avail. We still seem to be stuck at a certain weight, and this can really be leptin's fault. So what some people will do is they'll institute what's known as a refeed. And what refeeds are, in the simplest terms, is an increase of calories, usually up to maintenance or beyond, in the forms of carbohydrates. And what this supposedly will do, and what it does do, is it helps you kind of boost your leptin levels back up, or in layman's term, restart your metabolism. By doing this, you can then go back down into your caloric deficit, your leptin levels are higher from what they were, and you should be able to continue to lose weight. You will notice as you get to lower and lower amounts of body fat percentage, it does also become very hard to keep continually losing this weight. And this is where leptin really comes into play. So the amount of refeeds you do, the frequency at which you do them, how long you stay on them, body fat percentage really comes into play on this. Now the interesting thing about refeeds is they're not all too different from a cheat meal or a cheat day. So most people have cheat meals or cheat days where they eat whatever they want and as much as they want without counting anything. And in reality, while a lot of people might say they do this for their mental health because they're sick of being on a calorie restriction or they're sick of eating the same foods over and over again, in reality, it's really like a glorified refeed. The only main difference here is on cheat meals and cheat days, you're typically not counting macros, you're eating whatever you want and as much as you want, where a refeed is more controlled, where you're simply, in most cases, boosting carbohydrates to a certain level to affect leptin. Either way, both kind of get the same thing accomplished, but long-term goals come into play here. Again, with leptin and body fat percentage, as body fat gets lower and lower and leptin gets lower and lower, it becomes increasingly more difficult to manipulate that fat and lose that fat. Your body wants to hold on to it because fat is essential not only for protecting organs, but for hormones and energy as well. So for this, I hope that gives you a brief insight on refeeds, what they are, how often to do them. In most cases, once a week is fine, but again, it's really tough to put a concrete number on it because a lot of individual factors come into play, where it might be once every 2 weeks. For some people, it might be even more frequent than that. In the end, we will talk about those in future videos, but in the meantime, stay big.